At the end of every interview that we have for teacher candidates, we will say, "What questions do you have for us?" And they will always ask, "Well, what kind of support can I expect?" And we will always say, "Well, don't worry, we'll give you a mentor." But it's not real mentorship. I mean, it's support with the difficult kid or the field trip form or the grade card, but it isn't coaching. That's where partners like EdConnective step in. They provide observation and feedback with practice. That's real coaching. Their mission is to ensure that every student thrives by facilitating exceptional educator growth. So whether it's science of reading, whether it's leadership development, whether you're trying to build the best recruitment and retention efforts, check out edconnective.com. When I was superintendent, we created a geometry and construction class. Kids would take geometry on A days and then apply those principles to building a tiny home on the B days. And I loved asking kids, when they were out there in the dead of winter, why it was important to be out there working when it was so cold outside. And I remember one kid who said, "Today I'm cold, but tomorrow someone will have this home and will no longer be cold." And I loved that response. Our kids were learning geometry, sure, and they were learning home building, which was super cool. And they were learning empathy and compassion, totally human-centered. And we had another class where on A days, kids learned algebra, and on B days, they applied their learning to a small business, a t-shirt company that they were operating. Finding ways to build relevance and entrepreneurial opportunities. I mean, these weren't my ideas. I just happened to be smart enough to support the educators who came to me and pitched these classes. My guest today reminded me of the importance of reclaiming the narrative about public schools, how innovative they really are, and how they support opportunities that were previously unheard of in traditional schools. An entrepreneurial hub for students, internships, real-world experiences, early college for juniors and seniors so they could graduate high school with an associate's degree, totally debt-free. Please welcome Scott Menzel. I'm Peter Stiepelman, and this is An Imperfect Leader. Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dr. Scott Menzel, and Scott is the superintendent of the Scottsdale Unified School District in Scottsdale, Arizona. Scott, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
Well, thank you for joining me. I'm really excited. And I didn't realize this until I had started doing some research on you, that because of you, actually, my school district in Missouri was able to create its early college program. I joined my community's Chamber of Commerce to visit Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County in Michigan, where you were superintendent for, I think, 9 years before going to Arizona. And it was during that trip, actually, that we visited the early college program at Washtenaw Community College. The ability to offer juniors and seniors the opportunity to graduate high school with their AA degree debt-free was really a game changer for kids in your district, I know, and then has become a huge program for the kids in my former district. And so, and then I watched actually your strategic planning town hall meeting from 2021, which was really interesting. I could completely relate to listening to frustration and emotion and all the things associated with the pandemic, and also trying to move your district forward. And then I read recently the recently released Spring and Summer Showcase magazine, highlighting all the innovations that you're doing in Scottsdale Public Schools. And so I really feel sort of a real an attachment to you. So, but I wonder, would you talk a little bit about the importance of shedding what I have come to sort of understand as like conveyor belt education, that really antiquated model of how schools have looked for 100 plus years, and more towards what I think you have really tried to embrace, which is a much more student-centered approach to learning. So would you talk a little bit about that, shedding the conveyor belt piece and embracing a more transformative piece?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I think one of the things that has been a benefit to me in the course of my career as a superintendent is I didn't come up through the ranks. So in my vocabulary wasn't, well, we've always done it that way. So I'm always asking the question, how can we do things better? What are the opportunities that we can provide for our students that accelerate their learning, provide them every opportunity to achieve their full potential? And school worked for many people the way it was structured before, but not for everyone. And with advances in technology, with our understanding of how students learn, they learn at different rates and in different ways. And we know that if a student is sitting in a classroom marking time, then oftentimes we see behavioral implications of that. If they're properly challenged, we hold high expectations for all of them and create multiple different pathways to demonstrate competence. That internal motivation will pay significant dividends down the road. So for us in Scottsdale, we think about how do we ensure that we have world-class, future-focused learning opportunities for all of our students across our 29 campuses and Scottsdale Online. And we're not where we want to be. A vision is always a destination, and the power's in the journey. But we think about how do we create those opportunities leveraging technology. Technology itself is not a silver bullet. Lots of conversations in the current environment around the pros and the cons of artificial intelligence, for example. But what we know is that there's so much that's accessible to our students. And you mentioned the early college experience. The truth is, I believe the line should be blurred between high school and post-secondary, that it really should be a pre-K through 14 system. I would love it if every graduate had 2 years of a community college or those gen ed kinds of requirements for our students, so that then they can specialize and not leave with so much debt. Higher education itself is becoming so expensive that it prices many people out, or they get saddled with extraordinary amounts of debt. So if we can think about how we structure the system to accelerate learning, and where students need more time on task, provide that time, but where they've demonstrated mastery, don't waste their time. So for me, that's the operating premise is that students themselves really should own their learning and be given opportunities to accelerate where they can and extra support where they need it.
So you've said a couple of things that really resonate. For example, like conveyor belt education to me speaks to sort of those Carnegie units where we require kids to sit for a certain number of minutes and then we say, okay, you've done this class, as opposed to be able to demonstrate mastery potentially in half the amount of time, or for children who may need more time to be able to demonstrate mastery. You talked about providing hands-on real-world experiences. And that really resonates for me as well. And I'm curious, what are some ways that you're doing that in Scottsdale? How are you creating some of those pathways in your own place now?
There are a couple of things that I would highlight. So for Coronado High School, which is my only Title I high school, we are working to make that a true early college high school experience. And that would differentiate it from the other 4 within our school system. We're partnering closely with Scottsdale Community College. There have been for years dual enrollment opportunities, but not as many at Coronado because not as many teachers meet the criteria. So we're working to help find pathways to our teachers to be qualified to provide dual enrollment classes. But SCC has also, this past year, started with providing concurrent enrollment classes on the campus. So we eliminate any transportation barrier. We build it into the schedule. We're working on a proposal to create an entrepreneurship hub in alignment with some of the coursework that Scottsdale Community College will offer for our students. And we also have the Coronado Promise at Coronado, where community partners have come together to ensure 2 years of post-secondary education, primarily at the community college level, is paid for. Could be a trade school as well. And we would love to have it more robust, but we've started slow to build. But for students in South Scottsdale, this creates a unique advantage for them. Many are first-generation college-going students. And if you can demonstrate an ability to succeed in college while you're in high school, that builds confidence for success later on. We also have a Math Science Academy at Saguaro High School, where our students engage in some really powerful learning opportunities, work-based learning, internships, getting out in the community. But most recently, one of the very cool things was a partnership with the McDowell-Sonoran Conservancy. We're here in the desert in Arizona. And Scottsdale has, I think, 35,000 acres that are part of the McDowell-Sonoran Preserves. And our students have engaged in a project with the McDowell-Sonoran Conservancy, research with Northern Arizona University, and some others. They actually recently just got published in a peer-reviewed journal based on some research that they've done on site. So we're working to ensure that our students can have those real world experiences, working with partners in our community to springboard into the next phase of their educational journey and ultimately to be contributing members of our community.
I love it. I love the fact that you're saying, okay, so we're not going to be confined by the 4 walls of a classroom. We're going to actually use this place where we live and make that part of our classroom experience as well. That's really cool. This past year, I wrote a book called An Imperfect Leader. And in the book and in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension. It's called collective aspiration. And that's really like the heart of an organization's work. It asks that question, like, what do we want to create together? And inside that dimension, actually, there's this term, moral focus. And a moral focus could be considered a vision, I guess, but I think it actually goes deeper than that because I think it's deeply personal. It speaks to why we get up in the morning. It speaks to the one thing that keeps us focused when all that noise really becomes like a cacophony of criticism. And, I didn't mention this earlier when I was introducing you. I saved this till now, but I had the honor of learning from you along with Shelley Berman, Lavelle Brown, and I know that there was another superintendent. She was from California. Yes. Oh, her work was really powerful as well. And it was in an AASA session called Reclaiming the Narrative. And that's actually the name of the chapter in Shelley and Lavelle's book called A Courage for Which. I think we both endorsed it on social media. I wonder, would you talk a little bit about the advice that you gave leaders in that session who may be looking to reclaim the narrative about public education as a whole, but certainly in their public school districts in particular?
So I think there are a couple of things that are important. One is to be very clear on what your true north is. So when you talk about grounding things from a moral perspective, in its most simplistic terms, for me and for us in Scottsdale, it's because kids. At the core of what we do is a deep commitment to ensuring that each and every individual learner that walks through our doors is supported on their educational journey. We know they come from all different kinds of backgrounds, and our opportunity in public education is to help unleash that potential. And we support them where they are, regardless of what their needs are. And in this current environment, there's a lot of polarization. The culture wars are real. And so from a leader's perspective, there are a lot of things that can cause us to take our eyes off the ball. And so grounding us in our true north, which is we're here to serve the needs of children, and all children have value. And our opportunity is to be able to unleash that potential. That's the first thing. Secondly, in this environment, because people want to take our eye off the ball and claim certain things are happening when they're not happening, we have to be courageous in pushing back on those false narratives. There's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation that circulates in our communities that would cause people to think that schools are doing something other than supporting students on their educational journey. And so from a leader lens, we need to know what we're prepared to get fired for. There are certain things that I'm not willing to do in this job. And if I was asked to do it by a governing board, I would not stay in this position. There are some superintendents who have been fired for taking a principled stand. That's an occupational hazard we have. But I think at the end of the day, it's just really important to have clarity around why we do what we do and make that transparent to the communities that we serve.
I was thinking of, so I had a legislator, a state rep, who represented, we had 6 individuals who represented our community. And so one who kept claiming in public hearings that we were allowing children to identify as cats and that they were allowed to use litter boxes in the school. And it was, it was just the most astounding thing. Even when we'd say, kids have their phones out and they record everything. Could you send me a picture of what you're seeing? Because we can't find that anywhere, and it didn't matter. It was fueling a narrative that she wanted to be able to pursue because it really had to do with a real desire for vouchers and all those kinds of things that can be seen as an attack on public education as a whole. And so I really appreciate the advice that you've given, really, about taking a principled stance. It becomes really hard and it becomes overwhelming sometimes. And so I really was interested in having this conversation with you because I know that this whole call to courage, this whole reclaiming the narrative was something that you spoke so incredibly passionately about and from experience. And so taking that principled stance is good advice. What does that sometimes look like?
So there are a couple of things. And one of the examples I gave at that session was when there were calls for my removal because I had participated in an interview about our equity, inclusion, and social justice work in Washtenaw. And people wanted to take certain aspects of that interview, weaponize the language, and then claim I was racist against white people. And we had a very well-attended board meeting, probably 300 people, in February of 2023. And just before that meeting, Channel 12 showed up. And instead of avoiding the media, I went out and had a conversation with the reporter. I defined what diversity, equity, and inclusion meant for our community because those terms have been weaponized by people who don't really understand what that means for us. So I think part of reclaiming the narrative is instead of hiding or allowing others to fill the space, I think we have to step up and have those conversations. Define the terms. Don't cede the territory. Diversity it's not debatable. We have diverse communities. Even in predominantly white communities, there's still diversity. There's gender diversity. There are kids with disabilities. There's socioeconomic diversity. So that's not a debate that even makes any sense. Equity, if you understand what it really means in terms of providing each person what they need to be successful, and not equality of outcomes, which is what people want to say it is, two very different conversations. There's still agency that individuals, how you apply yourself matters, right? If you don't ever apply yourself, you won't be successful. But not everyone comes to school with the same level of assets or support. So let's define what those terms mean. And who doesn't want an inclusive environment where everyone feels a sense of belonging, that they're welcome in the school? So if you don't want that, then probably Scottsdale Unified's not for you. I think we just have to be able to put it out there rather than cower in the face of social media, behind the keyboard warriors who are perpetuating misinformation, and they continue to do it. And I've said in other settings, just because you repeat a lie over and over again doesn't suddenly make it true. It's still not true.
Keyboard warriors. I love that phrase. I'm totally stealing that because it's totally true. And I would say often the advice that superintendents get is just, don't respond. Don't respond. And what I hear you saying is the moment we choose to capitulate, right, by not responding, then it allows others to write that narrative that is false. So yeah, no, I totally agree. And I can imagine not just what you're saying, but your presence really changes the way that, here he is, he's accessible, and he's going to tell us exactly what he means by this. I'd like to ask you a question that I ask every guest who comes on the podcast. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you? Well,
I almost deleted the first email you sent. But then I read it. So the truth is, while it may sound negative, we all have opportunities to learn and grow. And so by acknowledging the fact that none of us are perfect, that we make the best decisions we can with the information that we have, and the only way we get better is by taking the time to reflect on those decisions, that's pretty important. And so I think what you're elevating in language that might not resonate with everyone is the importance of reflecting on the decisions that we make and learning from them, whether they turn out really well or whether or not they didn't.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of an Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And my guest is Dr. Scott Menzel, superintendent of Scottsdale Unified School District in Scottsdale, Arizona. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they had to make, and then we discuss it. Scott, what happened?
So I want to talk a little bit about a decision that we made shortly after I arrived to pilot Prisms of Reality, which is a virtual reality tool that when it launched was really focused on math and science, but has expanded over the 3 years that we've worked with it. In part, what I was interested in addressing is a need to improve and accelerate math achievement in Scottsdale, middle school and high school in particular. And when I was able to look at and do a test demo with the virtual reality, I was just blown away with respect to how real it was when you engaged with the technology and how practical it was to understand the application of the mathematical concept that was being addressed with whatever the unit of study was. So we started a pilot project 3 years ago. And this year, at the conclusion of the third year have decided to pull the plug. Not because the technology itself isn't good. In fact, it's great and has gotten better every year. And we've had an amazing partnership with the company, but because we've not been able to get it to stick. And so I'm a believer that in education, there's not a silver bullet solution. I don't like to just unilaterally declare we're going to do X and then implement. I prefer pilot and scale so that we can learn. And there was some angst around pulling the plug on this. But at the end of the day, at this moment in time, we needed to not spend any more money on something that wasn't producing the kind of results we envisioned when we started the pilot project.
First of all, thinking about VR, I absolutely do think that it is the one future for us in our schools, particularly as the infrastructure bill gets to continue to make its way, and there are funds available for rural parts of our country where kids could put on VR headsets. And to your point, I think you said it really was quite a new world experience when you put on the headset and to be transported to a whole nother place. And to think about children who have particular interests or want to take certain courses that their districts don't offer, but be able to sort of put on these headsets and join classes and classrooms and other peers from all over the world and be able to take these courses. I do think that is the future. And then what I hear you saying is you make decisions with the people most impacted, and there was probably a decision that needed to be made about why you're pulling the plug, and that may be sort of why, what got overlooked. So let's get to that first question of, so what got overlooked in this situation?
So I think there were a couple of things. We because we're a good sized district with 21,000 students, probably close to 1,500 certified teachers, it's usually not hard to find one or two or a handful that are willing to pilot. And so that first year, we had some willing teachers that were comfortable with the technology, able to do some things. And then we expanded to, I think, 4 other schools in the second year. But that's where we started to see some of the breakdown. And it was a combination of, if the technology doesn't always work reliably, and if teachers don't understand how this can get integrated in their delivery of the content versus as a reward at the end of a unit or as an add-on, something else that they have to do. So in retrospect, I think having teachers buy in on the front end. So I had administrators who looked at the tool, but we didn't have the teachers before we made the decision to start the pilot. So in retrospect, I would have invited those Vanguard type teachers who are willing to experiment to the table to raise other questions that we might not have considered on the front end that might have had an impact on its ability to be embraced by others when we expanded.
Fascinating. So this idea, so you've got your administrators say, this would be great. And meanwhile, your teachers are thinking, all right, I've already got a fairly impossible job. Now you want me to integrate this new technology in a way that is a good use of time and actually furthers and develops the child's ability to do well in school.
There was a hiccup in the middle, and so I think that, and again, I think the power of that technology to eliminate barriers is pretty significant, but process also matters.
That's true. What did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed?
So, as a superintendent in a school district of 29 buildings, when we do pilot projects like this, it gives me an opportunity to have more direct conversations with teachers who are on the front end of thinking about, okay, how do we improve opportunities for students? What I learned from the teachers that piloted the tool is that it did help with engagement. We didn't have enough consistent usage to really answer the question, did it help accelerate achievement in a way that was measurable? So that was the part that would have been the holy grail, right? Engagement, that's good. Did they actually learn and master the content in a way that we haven't seen previously? Because that would have been the sweet spot. But having the conversations with the teachers, building those relationships, understanding what worked and didn't work. And even with my teaching and learning team at district office, they fully engaged. They were part of the professional development. They got an opportunity to see how this technology could positively impact teaching and learning. So while we ultimately needed to make the choice because we didn't have sufficient support for continuing the investment, we learned a lot in the process.
Let me ask you this question, because you made a statement about you don't unilaterally make a decision to do something. You likely don't unilaterally decide to pull something either. And so as part of this relationship and listening, this likely was more of a shared decision of, boy, this is a pretty cool tool, and it's not yet getting us what we want. And do we, I don't know how you come to consensus. Sometimes consensus is best described as 100% of the people getting 80% of what they want, as opposed to, trying to come up with some arbitrary number of what consensus is. And so I'm curious about the relationship that you had to build and maintain or create, or because of the relationship, you were able to make this decision together.
So we surveyed the teachers who are using the tool to get feedback. And it reinforced what we had observed, and that is when they used it and when the technology was working properly, students were engaged. But they never crossed that threshold of, here's how it integrates into what we're teaching with this particular unit. And so it's a part of what I do that helps.
Gotcha. It was like a field trip.
It's like a very good analogy, like a field trip. And so given that, and given the loss of ESSER funding, we're all looking at how we spend money. With declining enrollment, our budget's not growing. And so then we have to ask the question, is this the best use of scarce resources? If the teachers had said, absolutely, we cannot imagine doing what we're doing without the tool, I could have found a way to fund it. But when they didn't come to us with that kind of enthusiastic endorsement and saying, yes, we need to have this, then the decision to say, okay, we've learned from the pilot project, but we need to step away from it at this time. It may not be a never, but not now, in terms of how it will work in Scottsdale Unified. That was a decision that was informed by the frontline staff.
What frustrated you?
What frustrated me, I think probably two things. One, I didn't know that we were having some hiccups with the technology itself that was causing people not to use it. Because I know that when the technology doesn't work, people just throw their hands up and say, okay, I'm going to keep doing what I've always done. And so that was part of the frustration. The other is that we didn't cross that threshold from seeing it as an add-on to something that could really enhance and accelerate learning. Math, some people love it. They come to, they enjoy worksheets. They enjoy, doing formulas.
Boy, I hope we get to do evens and odds today.
Right. But for many people, the question, especially as you're getting into middle school, is why do I need to know this? And the power that I saw in Prisms of Reality is it helped answer that question. How am I utilizing this? So the various units, there was one with landing airplanes, air traffic controller. Math's really important for all sorts of aspects of our lives. And when you can make it real in tangible ways through virtual reality, to me, that was like the light bulb's going to go on. They'll memorize or know and learn and master the content, not just for the test, but because now they understand how it applies in the real world. So for me, the frustration was all of the potential I saw and how VR could make math relevant never materialized, even though I think the power is still there.
What could you have done differently? So there's the what got overlooked, and then there's the leader's role in this as well.
I'd go back to the point on the front end, having more intentional conversations with the teachers who are willing to pilot on the front end. So we're working to create a culture of innovation, and that means we try things and expect failure, and then we continue to learn from that failure and try more things. And that's not how many teachers are wired. We like to get good grades. We like to have the right answer. We're motivated, and so thinking differently about how do you engage those teachers who are willing to pilot something new, but listen carefully to the feedback that they have. There will be a whole group of people who are unwilling to change anything, right? That we know about that group. I really want to be able to empower the people who are thinking about, okay, what and how can we approach learning differently to get better outcomes? The system's designed perfectly to produce the results that it's.
Oh my gosh, I was exactly thinking that in terms of like the Water Center, which is located in Tucson, Arizona, would say exactly that a system's behavior, it will create exactly the results it's designed to create. And so
if we're not happy with the results, we're going to have to do something different.
Right. And so I imagine, and part of that is when you're convening your teachers in the future to do something like this, that also having that shared image of what success looks like, right? Because then they can identify, do we have a shared image of what success looks like? And then are we making our way towards that? Or do we have to make a mid-course correction as opposed to sort of finding out on the back end that, it wasn't working?
And this was one of those ideas that surfaced in my first year on the job during the pandemic, where we weren't having a lot of in-person meetings. There was social distancing. There were these kinds of, virtual meetings, but not the same environment that we have now where you just bring people together, have the conversation. I like to talk about creating the sandbox for our staff to innovate in. And we actually have provided grant funding for mini grants within the system for people to propose ideas for innovation. We ask them, what's their theory of action? We ask them, what results do you expect to see? Report out on that. And so we're working to build that culture. Probably this happened in advance of creating the structure. Now we have the structure designed to help encourage innovation across the district.
Well, that kind of speaks to my last question, which is, in the end, what was something that was good that came out of this situation? And it sounds like you've already made some of those mid-course corrections of, if we're going to pursue innovation in the future, has to be sort of a protocol that we follow, that we are working on this together and we have a shared image or an expectation of what we expect to happen and how to manage that tension when we don't see those results immediately.
And I think two things that I would emphasize on that. One, as we've talked about creating a culture of innovation, we have a bias towards yes. We hear no too frequently and too fast. So a bias towards yes, but that doesn't mean no is never the outcome. And so the other is never double down on a bad decision. So if it didn't work, just because it was your idea doesn't mean you continue to do the thing that's not working. What we want is to accelerate learning, create more opportunities, and learn from failure. And that's part of building a culture of innovation that recognizes if you're going to innovate, there will be more failures than successes. But when you find those successes, you have something that you can scale that will benefit all the students.
My guest today was Dr. Scott Menzel, Superintendent of the Scottsdale Unified School District in Scottsdale, Arizona. And Scott, thank you, first of all, for not deleting my initial email. Thank you truly for your leadership. Thank you for maintaining this strong moral focus when it comes to educating children, supporting teachers, maintaining a moral compass that seeks to reclaim and then maintain a narrative about public schools, really being a national treasure that we must all revere. And, that has everything to do with what you said right at the beginning, because kids. So what a joy this has been. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. It's a joy to be here.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print-inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader. I'm Peter Stiepelman. Please join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? It's kind of a silly question because I know you are. MPAT Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with MPAT Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. MPAT Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools.